All right, so if you still don't get it, why are people so angry? We're going to go into a little bit more detail about this. But here you can clearly see that in the 1990s, once the Corrections Corporation of America, that's actually a stock that is traded publicly, and you can look it up on the New York Stock Exchange. Once that is created and prison expansion begins in the 1990s, you can see the prison population escalate rapidly. And just look to this here. And then here you can also see that racial profiling, and this is in the 2000s, so this is even later, after the broken window theory and stop and frisk starts becoming the norm in New York City, 90% of uh, of stop and frisks in New York City were either black or Latino. So clearly, a relationship has been cultivated between police and racial minorities that is antagonistic, that is untrustworthy, and both sides view each other with animosity. How do we rebuild this relationship, especially considering the following? If we look at the history of police brutality, it is such a persistent issue that there are too many cases to name. There are thousands of cases that I'm not going to name today. There are ones that I'm forgetting. There are really famous ones that I'm not going to be describing. But remember that thousands and thousands of victims of police brutality have not made the national news. Not all of them were Rodney King, that a video went, basically became all over America and inspired riots. In 1964, however, there were riots in Harlem because a 15-year-old was shot by an off-duty officer that was acquitted and never held accountable. In 1989, you may remember the Central Park Five, something that our current president was very much publicly in favor of prosecuting 5 teenagers for the rape of a woman in Central Park. DNA evidence later proved that all of them were completely innocent, that there was no physical evidence whatsoever, and they were only convicted because of confessions coerced by police officers. But of course, no officers were ever held accountable. However, the Central Park Five did sue New York City and win millions of dollars, which is the case in a lot of these instances. But in 1992, there were Washington Heights riots after a 23-year-old was chased through buildings and was killed by police. In 1997, Abner Louima, who's actually didn't get killed but was brutally tortured and sodomized with a broom handle by an officer. And then even though officers were arrested and brought to trial, they were later acquitted, and none of them were ever held accountable. In 1999, only a couple of years later, Amadou Diallo was surrounded by police, and when he reached for his wallet to show his identification, he was shot 41 times, even though he was unarmed. Only a few years later, Sean Bell, after attending a wedding party, was with his friends in his car when police opened fire and shot 50 rounds into his car, and yet another unarmed black man died, and 2 of his friends were brutally injured too. In all of these instances, no police officer was ever held guilty of any crime. There are a number of other instances in which police officers have been charged with murder, but for the most part, the overwhelming majority of these cases, the criminal justice system did not work to serve justice for African Americans. And this is only in part why people are angry. We can go through these cases over and over and over again and see that they just keep repeating themselves. And some of the most famous ones, like Eric Garner, who gave us the expression, "I can't breathe," after he was put in a chokehold because he was selling Lucy cigarettes on the street on Staten Island, put in a chokehold, complained to the officer that he couldn't breathe and was killed anyway. Or Michael Brown, only age 18, unarmed black kid, shot by a police officer after a confrontation. Or Laquan McDonald, 17-year-old, was completely unarmed, just throwing a temper tantrum in the middle of the street when one officer opened fire on him and shot him 11 or 16 times. I forget exactly. That officer actually is in jail for murder because of the murder of Laquan McDonald. Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old boy playing with a toy gun in a park in Cleveland, shot by police officers. That's just 2014. 2015, Freddie Gray was taken into custody for having a knife, and while in police custody in a van, became comatose somehow and ended up dying. Still, no explanation, no justice. Or how about Natasha McKenna, who was in a mental institution, who had schizophrenia and was having a schizophrenic episode and was then restrained, and yet an officer tased her anyway and she died. Or 2016, when Philando Castile was pulled over by an officer in Minnesota and declared that he had a gun And immediately the officer drew his weapon and started firing. Even though Philando Castile was trying to peacefully announce, "Officer, I have a gun. It's here. I have a permit for it." Officer immediately reacted by killing him in front of his girlfriend. And then his girlfriend started streaming on Facebook Live. Or Alton Sterling, 37-year-old in Baton Rouge, again put in a chokehold by police and was killed. And the countless others who just, there isn't enough time to name how many terrible and tragic cases of people who were shot. Sometimes, like in the case of Breonna Taylor, cops mistakenly coming in to serve an arrest warrant into her apartment, shot her while she was asleep. 26-year-old woman. And of course, today, America reels in the pain of seeing the video of George Floyd with a white police officer with his hands in his pocket and his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes while Floyd was unarmed, murdered in police custody again. And the charge of third-degree murder and no charges against the other officers, only brought after demonstrations and riots started, and now the autopsy report that came out that showed that George Floyd died because of his own bad health, when now an independent autopsy has proven that he died from strangulation due to the police officer. It just proves the corruption in the criminal justice system and why people are so angry. So the rage is burning right now, and much like fire, fire can be used as a fuel that can give us great energy and can innovate a new future, or fire can become a wildfire and burn down everything. So how do we make this a fire that fuels a new future and not something that just burns our entire country to the ground? Because there are nations out there who have been stoking this fire. Nations like Russia who have been proven to be facilitating extremism and anger and discord in the United States with their cyber activities. Can we build a new country out of this? Or is everything going to burn to the ground? And I think to answer that question, we have to wonder how we can heal the anger that's out there. How do we build a new agreement in which people can truly believe? Well, I've heard some specific ideas. One of the young people who was arrested outside of CNN was asked by a CNN reporter, "Why are you here? What do you want to see?" And he just said straight up, "Police need to be trained better." In New York City, this is one of the things that has actually gotten better, is that New York City police officers are now trained in de-escalation, and incidents of police brutality have reduced compared to the 1990s and 2000s, and stop and frisk has been banned. So if we could get national standards for how to train police, maybe we can move this in the right direction. Some people have proposed that communities of color should police themselves. But of course, one of the flip sides to this is George Zimmerman, who was a community police officer in Florida, actually killed Trayvon Martin, another teenage unarmed black kid, in a community policing incident because of he was suspicious of the kid because he wore a hoodie and was walking around all suspiciously. So community policing needs work too as an idea, but perhaps that's a way of creating more buy-in with law enforcement. And of course, these issues are broader than just policing. For minorities or for the disaffected to feel welcome in the society, we need a more equitable economy. There are so many people, despite seeing the record numbers of the stock market and the greatest economy ever being championed by so many people, that just wasn't benefiting people equitably. The benefits were not evenly distributed. And as long as people can't access resources, political resources like voting and politicians, when corporations basically fund our elections, a lot of common people of the working class and people who don't have that kind of money feel like they have no power. And maybe we need to create something like a publicly funded elections, or at least like in Brazil, give every candidate free TV time without forcing them to pay millions of dollars for it. Maybe that's a step towards a more equitable society where people don't feel so disaffected. And of course, maybe just access to these basic human needs like nutrition and education and healthcare and better housing. If we could build a society that actually provides a situation where human rights can be respected, maybe we'll get more buy-in and maybe we can heal our wounds. So I want to know your ideas. And that's not just for this assignment, but for your future and for our future together, for our communities. How are we going to voice these ideas? How are we going to put these into action? I really, really want to hear your thoughts. And I hope that you guys found this meaningful. And this is a scary time. These are crazy things that are happening. So I hope that this makes it meaningful and hopefully a little hopeful that we can emerge from this conflict better. And we can build new cooperative agreements in our society that will work better for people. And if you know anybody that still doesn't get it, that doesn't understand why there's so much anger, or begrudges people who are angry, who are blaming protesters and getting angry at people for being angry, please share this. Please share this. Share this information. I hope it can be powerful. I hope it can be meaningful. Because there are people out there who still don't get it and who are resentful towards black people in particular for being angry about America. And I hope that this gives some context and sheds some light on why people are so angry because I didn't even scratch the surface. There are so many names and so many human beings who have been murdered by police unjustly, especially black people, but even unarmed people that aren't black get murdered by police every year. Thousands every year. That just couldn't even begin to make a video about all the African Americans who have been victimized by the criminal justice system. And this pattern is what has stoked this anger more than anything. So I really want you to think hard about this. How are we going to move forward as a society? Because if we burn our society to the ground, then we're left wondering how we replant a new one. And there's some scary forces when people are angry and afraid. There's really, really scary things that can happen. I hope we don't see the values that we hold of human rights and human dignity and our ability to make free choices and freely express ourselves. I hope those don't get dissolved amidst all this anger. And that's up to us. That's up to all of us. So anyway, I'm going to leave it up to you. You guys, please share your ideas with me. Tell me what you're doing. Tell me what you want to see happen. Or just, you know, tell me what's going on. Are you frustrated? Are you scared? What do you want to see happen? Do you have any ideas about how we can come out of this? Please share, and let's all try to heal together. Take care, everybody.